I actually have it set up to stream to 4 different places at once right now.
Hmm.
It's a pretty cool program.
Good.
All right, it looks like we're live. Had to give it a second so it load on all 3 websites. Uh,
Okay.
so, Ben, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yes, I am a full-time Christian evangelist and missionary. I do all of my work domestically, that is stateside. I also work with Teen Challenge, where I serve as an adjunct faculty member for their Leadership Institute here in Minnesota. I also run a Christian website, which is apologetically focused. And so there I'm answering a lot of tough gospel questions and inquiries into the existence of God as well as evidence for the resurrection. I speak itinerantly at local churches and visit pulpits. And then I also have done some evangelistic work on secular college campus events, this type of thing with Campus Crusade for Christ. So, judging from your description of your Christian background, you may know some of these ministries and be familiar with them. And so, I also am married. I've been married now for 11 years to my best friend, and I have 2 children. We have 2 children together. We began our family in 2013, and we're very involved with the faith community out here, and really seem to be enjoying a lot of how we feel that God has been able to use us in this context.
Well, cool. So, I just to jump right in, I'm an atheist, by which I mean I don't believe there are any reasons to believe in the existence of God. Could you tell me
Mhm.
the reasons you believe there are to believe in the existence of God? Then I'd like to tell you my position on those reasons, then I'd like to hear your thoughts on my position.
Sure, sure. Well, I think that some of the things which have led me to embrace belief in theism have to do with some of my own Christian experiences. That is, my own personal experiences with God Himself. And I consider these experiences to be sufficient to justify my own sense of faith in God. But certainly, in the context of evangelistic discussion where we're engaging in interaction with outsiders, there I'm more reliant upon arguments and evidence for the existence of God. And some of the most powerful ones come from arguments which are classically quite old. One of them would be the axiomatic argument for the existence of God. And so this is one of the arguments that I hold to as one of the most powerful refutations for atheism in terms of an in principle defeater to the position.
Would you mind giving us an outline of the axiomatic argument?
Sure, the axiomatic argument essentially holds that if we are properly defining God in his attributes that are generally agreed upon, then that description in itself is enough to justify the existence of the person in question. So, if God's existence can be demonstrated as axiomatic, then we have an objective grounds for saying that God indeed exists.
So, but then just to refute the axiomatic, all you have to do is reject the commonly held definition, right? So, if like you could say axiomatically a triangle has 3 sides, and then someone comes along and say, no, it doesn't, that kind of refutes the axiomatic argument, doesn't it?
Yes, but it wouldn't necessarily be a hindrance to the Christian's faith in the belief of the God so described in the scriptures. That is, in order for atheism to be true, according to the atheist standard of what true justifying belief is, then he would have to be able to show that all of the Christian or other religions of the world, all the various definitions of God are necessarily false. And this is a burden of proof that, to my knowledge, no atheist has ever been able to shoulder.
Well, I don't think so. In the case of the axiomatic argument, in any axiomatic argument. It's like saying definitionally true, or something like red is redness, or triangles have three sides, or a word means a certain thing. It's only axiomatic as long as everyone literally agrees on it. But if there's a single dissenter who says, I just disagree with that, then it's no longer axiomatic. It's a rejection. Like, for
That
example,
would be my understanding of what an axiom is. An axiom would be something which is self-evidentially true. Example, A plus B is equal to B plus A. And then anyone who wants to say that that is somehow false has to show that there's a justifiable ground for doubting it. And I just don't see, in the case of a clear axiom, like the axioms that govern logic or mathematics, that we have good counters to the justification that is presented to us in simple systems of mathematics.
all right, absolutely. I agree in the case of logic and math, like A equals A is axiomatically true. And so if you use an axiomatic argument for that, it's reliable. But if you use an axiomatic argument for the definition of a bachelor, anybody could just come up with a new definition and completely refute the axiomatic argument for that definition because language is arbitrary. So, for example,
Right.
if you have a list of properties that you attribute to a god, I can say, I don't like that property, I'm going to get rid of it. So now I have a new list of properties, and this list of properties is, unless you can show that it is somehow less plausible, it would then therefore be equally plausible and refute the axiomatic argument for the existence of God.
The problem here is that essentially what we have is takes, for example, the skeptical arguments against the possibility of knowledge. The person who comes to sort of refute the skeptic's argument on the basis of reliabilism, i.e., science works, or some other description of how to simply refute the arguments for skepticism that we cannot have knowledge about true justified beliefs. There, I think the problems that one runs into can be quite significant. And so I'd be interested in hearing how you're going to describe that the Christian God would be false in this case, because essentially, as in the case I just described, what the reliabilist is doing in that case is just simply changing the grounds of the discussion, just simply changing definitions, which is tantamount to sort of changing the subject. It doesn't really address the question.
Well, I would say that my alternative list of properties is equally as reasonable or more reasonable than your list of properties, and that would mean that your list of properties was not axiomatic.
That would be an interesting place to start. So I'd certainly be interested in hearing what that would be.
So I tend to go with the naturalist pantheistic view, which is just an eternal, all-powerful nature. You don't need anything else that can explain everything. You don't, and that is sufficient to be a God replacement without the consciousness.
A God replace. So there, are you reliant upon the idea that the universe is indwelt by spirit or something of this kind of sense or description of the universe?
No, more of
That
an
is some sort of a transcendent, ever existing entity that has existed perpetually.
essentially sort of like that, but the eternally existing can mean many different things. It could mean past eternal, but it could also mean outside of space time, or it could mean like a B theory of time. There are many different categories of things that that could mean, but it would mean that
Mhm.
there is essentially a natural something that it has existed in place of a god.
I see. Yeah, here I just simply would point out to the objector in this case that the notion that the universe has existed in a state of a sort of an eternal uh, sequence of temporal events. I would say that the arguments of mathematics and philosophy have sufficiently shown that we cannot have an infinite regress of past events, that such a regress of events must have some sort of a starting point because the universe that is triggered itself triggers nothing.
Right, so our universe had a beginning, but that does not exclude the possibility of a pre existing natural thing that is itself outside of space and time, which can in fact exist in the same way God does outside of space and time. For example, there are theories like Nima Arkani Hamad's amplituhedron or Sean Carroll's emergent spacetime, where there are natural properties that exist independent of spacetime because spacetime is emergent in these theories. So there is a way that natural things can exist spacetime independent. And there are different ways to have other kinds of spacetime that can also exist independent of our spacetime.
Yeah, Sean Carroll's ideas have not really garnered the broader assent of the wider astrophysical community. There is quite a bit of skepticism within the atheist communities themselves, from what I am uh, understanding at this point in terms of the model.
Oh yeah,
Certain
you're absolutely right. But his theories,
Ward-Guth-Vilenkin theorems, for example, would hold that any sort of universe which is governed by a space-time reality necessarily itself has a beginning and origin to its own existence, and this is said to start from a space-time singularity.
well, no, not exactly. The singularity hypothesis was Stephen Hawking, and he refuted that hypothesis. It was his dissertation where he presented it, and then he refuted it in a later paper. The Borg-Guth-Vilenkin theorem states that any any universe that holds the same kind of spatial
Right.
geometry has a beginning, but it only applies to
Mhm.
universes that apply with the same laws of physics that are known, like our laws of physics. If you add a new law of physics, it no longer applies. Like quantum gravity, as soon as we discover, or if there is a quantum gravity, the Borg-Guth-Vilenkin theorem no longer applies to those
The
universes.
theorem holds irrespective of any a discovery of quantum gravity. It would hold irrespective of a description of that time before the Planck era.
No, that's incorrect. I have a direct quote that I have in my book about from Vilenkin specifically and Guth actually saying this, that if there was a discovery of this new kind of thing, and they specifically list quantum gravity, then their theorem would no longer apply. So it only applies, like, I mean, this isn't,
Does it rely upon the idea of, for example, imaginary time?
no, that's Stephen Hawking's model. But,
That's what I'm referring to.
right.
Alex Vilenkin's model as well, which draws upon the same concepts of the very paper you said refuted the need for a space-time singularity, actually as assents to the same or utilizes the same theory of a sort of imaginary time. And this idea is cannot be construed uh, realistically. It's a matter of sheer instrumentalism. It's not something. For example, what would it mean to speak about the elapse of an imaginary second? How could we even speak about such a concept intelligibly? And
Well,
so it seems that the notion of imaginary time used to sort of shave off the hard edge, this extreme extremity of the physical universe. Hawking himself, for example, admitted, and I have a direct quote of this as well, that essentially, if we do away with imaginary time, then the singularity, the space-time singularity, reappears. And so
so
there just seems to be a mathematical contrivance. So for that reason, it doesn't seem persuasive to me.
Well, my objection had nothing to do with Hawking's imaginary time specifically, but imaginary time isn't imaginary. It's like imaginary numbers. It's a reference to a mathematical vector. It has nothing to do with being imaginary as your imagination. So it's a mathematical
No, I'm not
analysis.
saying that it does, but can it be construed realistically is the question, or is it a matter of sheer instrumentalism?
Yes, it can, like imaginary numbers can. They're vectors. So yes, but
Alex
my
Valentin,
but I mean that's my original objection was
go
that
ahead.
was that the Borg-Guth-Vilenkin theorem only applies to the known laws of physics, which applies to just any physical theory. As soon as you discover something new, a new law of physics, that the old theory may or may not apply to this new model of physics. So the Borg-Guth-Vilenkin theorem only applies to universes that have the same laws as our current universe, which doesn't apply to anything beyond our current universe.
I'm not aware of that description of the Borg-Guth-Vilenkin theorem. My understanding of the Borg-Guth-Vilenkin theorem is that it holds that any universe which exists on average in a state of cosmic expansion cannot be eternal in the past, but must have a beginning at a singularity a finite time ago. That's just simply what it says, and that this model is said to hold irrespective of any quantum description of gravity, and that it can be applied straightforwardly to cosmology in higher dimensions. And so, for that reason, it's a fairly convincing proof that there is no eternal past, but that uh, even in the case of the multiverse itself must have a beginning.
Well, no, again, that's false. I think you have a misunderstanding of how physics works here. All physics is differential equations. So it's using combinations of known principles and particles and the equations that represent those things and combining them in different ways to create a model of reality. But any
Mhm.
insertion of things outside of that invalidates the model immediately. It doesn't apply. It's not a universal. It doesn't apply philosophically to everything. It only applies to combinations of known principles, particles, and laws in physics, which is why when you add new things, which physicists aren't allowed to do, you're just allowed to make stuff up, then those physical models no longer apply. So the Borg-Guth-Vilenkin theorem only applies to known physical models. and it's
I'm
rejected
not
by
aware.
by many people. Like Sean Carroll, for example, is one, but there are many other theories of eternal kinds of universes that it doesn't apply to. But it doesn't. It definitely doesn't apply to my model because I'm talking about things outside of physics.
Well, certainly, I'm not aware of any possible way to show that the Born-Guth-Vilankin theorem is false. But if we just simply reduce the problem of an eternal past to a simple mathematical question, we can't extend a regress of events, past events, infinitely into the past. There's no way to do that, which would allow us to arrive at the present time. And so most philosophers, Christian philosophers, have argued for that reason that the impossibility of an infinite regress of events itself cries out for the existence of God.
I am familiar with that argument, but most atheist philosophers, which are the majority of philosophers, and most physicists completely reject it as non-incoherent because, yes, we can. I mean, we can just say, if you pick any given number, like 47, there are infinitely many numbers before 47. Like, there are infinitely many numbers between 46 and 47, but you can just pick the number. And there could be likewise be like a quantum state that
But
can.
that would be a category confusion, correct? Because a potentially infinite set of numbers is different from an actual infinite. The existence of an actual infinity exists nowhere, and David Hilbert argued that, and many other current very good philosophers of time also argue the same way. George Ellis, the man who supposedly knows more about cosmology than any man alive, holds that these arguments seem to him to demonstrate fairly conclusively that there is no universe in which there is an infinite past regress of events. And I
Well, no,
simply find myself inclined to agree.
well, it's purely an epistemic issue. We can't express an actual infinite, but that doesn't mean an actual infinite can't exist. It's a confusion between our ability to express them with the ontology of that thing actually existing. It's like saying we can't express or imagine a tesseract. That doesn't mean a tesseract can't exist. So the fact that we can't express the infinite isn't an ontological category that it can't exist. There's no connection there, which is why most physicists reject that argument, or most
Well,
physicists and philosophers reject that
for
argument.
example, just practically speaking, how could we conjecture about the existence of a man who's sitting in a chair and counting down from infinity and arrives at zero today at the time of this discussion? I think that that's impossible. And I think that that kind of a refutation is persuasive to most people that we don't have any models of past infinities. These are conceptually impossible to create. And so, therefore, the best theoretical models on offer from modern science and cosmology all show us that there is a beginning to the universe. In fact, Alexander Vilenkin said in 2013, I believe, that all of the evidence within modern cosmology suggests that the universe had a beginning.
Right, and Guth, the other person who wrote that, expressly refuted that in the debate with Sean Carroll with William Lane Craig, who actually showed a clip of Guth saying, "Was there a path from the universe?" And Guth said, "Yes." Well, we don't know. This does not refute this. His theory specifically does not refute this at all. It's just a misinterpretation.
I'm aware of the code of that
So
code.
but yes, we can actually count down from infinity to zero. I can do it right now. Infinity, zero, negative infinity. You just have to do it in sets. Like infinity isn't a number, it's a description of a property of a set. So you can count from infinities to zero and keep going. You just have to go in increments of infinity.
Well, if it were like, for example, what is infinity minus three? It's infinity.
No, that's incorrect. In set theory and ordinal numbers, you can actually add and subtract with infinites and get bigger numbers. Like
Are you talking about an aleph or a lemniscat?
I do not know. It's just ordinal numbers, and there are other kinds of numbers where you can add and
Well,
subtract infinites.
the Hebrew character aleph would be the way that we would describe a potential infinity, and a lemniscat, which would be essentially the one that most people are familiar with, the sort of sideways eight. This would be the one that's the actual infinite. And if we just simply take the standard rules of transfinite mathematics, so what is infinity minus three? It's infinity. What is infinity plus three? It's infinity. The answer has been determined through the laws of mathematics. And so that's for that reason, it's pretty persuasive to most people.
No, that's generally false by every set theorist ever. We can do math with infinites quite easily. It's not really a challenge.
I'm not
Uh,
saying that we cannot do mathematics within transfinite arithmetic. It's just that the answers show things which are, in the eyes of most people, inconsistent. Think about David Hilbert's hotel, the famous Hilbert's Hotel example. And there are large numbers of other ones. And so, for this reason, I take it to be axiomatic that there must be a beginning to a sequence of events.
Right. Again, you're confusing
Or as I mentioned earlier,
language. You're confusing language and ontology. Infinite isn't a number. You can't. When you add and subtract, it's like saying, what is x minus 3? You can get contradictory numbers if you use multiple different x's. Like if you get x minus 3 is 7 if you're using x equals 10, but you get x minus 3 is 4 if you're using x is 7. Because x is a property or it's a variable. Infinite is like a property or a variable. It's not a number. So if you're subtracting it and getting contradictory answers, it's because you're using different infinites. Like if you subtract infinite from infinite, you get 0 if they're the same size. If you subtract a bigger infinite from a smaller infinite, you get negative infinity. And if you subtract a smaller infinite from a bigger infinite, you get positive infinity. Like,
I'm not aware of there being smaller or larger infinities.
well, that was kind of the point of one of Hilbert's Hotel. Yes, there are definitely smaller and bigger infinities. That's one of the just basic facts of set theory. I'm not sure why you.
I'm unfamiliar with that notion. The example that I gave from David Hilbert's hotel just simply said if you had an infinite number of guests and you brought an infinite number of guests into the hotel because there's an infinite number of rooms, this infinite number of guests, just simply have every guest go down one room and fill it up. And this yields a self contradictory results. And so, for this reason, David Hilbert himself said the actual infinity is nowhere in the world. It's something that, in principle, cannot exist. And so, for that reason, I take it as a sheer given that we cannot have a past infinity of events, but we must have a finite number of them. And this justifies our ability to reach today or to our conversation.
Well, right, right. Again, this is confusing language and reality. Like there can't be an actual X number of things, right? I mean, I would say that like an actual X number of things can't exist because X isn't a thing, right? It's just a description of a property. And so, likewise, there can't be an actual infinite because infinite is a description of a property. It's an abstract kind of a term, but there can be infinitely many things, but infinite is a
That's the
description.
tricky thing about it, because if we're going to say that it cannot be actual, then how are we saying that there was an actual infinite number of past events? And
Well,
that's precisely
it's the
the
same with
problem.
an X number of things. Like I am in this box. There are like a certain number of marbles. There are X number of marbles, but the X doesn't exist. It's not like the X number of marbles is real. It's just an abstract description of the real thing. So there can be a real thing which consists of infinite. It can be described with an infinite, but the
But
infinite itself doesn't exist. It's just a description. It's a
that
variable.
seems to be just the point, though. Is that if we're going to say that the past contains an infinite number of events, then it needs to be something more than just a representative placeholder. It needs to be an actual something, and there has to have been this actual number of events which regresses into the past that leads us to today. And this is supposed to be a borderless uh, basically just move in that direction, and you have an infinite number of these events which have traversed. And I'm just not aware of any argument that rationally refutes this. I've never
Oh,
heard one that has
I'm
persuaded me. Let me just put it that way. I've never heard of, and I've certainly been open. I've made myself very available to arguments from atheism, and I've just never heard anyone that has managed to grab my attention. But this isn't actually the only reason that I believe in the existence of God. There are other reasons as well. Some of them are just some of the problems which are inherent within the entire approach of skepticism as an argument to begin with.
Well, I'd like to pick up on that one point where you said there is an infinite past amount of things. Like I don't disagree with that. I can grant that. I don't see any problem with that, which is where the disagreement is that even if there is an infinitely past number of things before this point, I don't see any contradiction to there being a point right now, even if there is an infinite number of
I'll
past
just take
things.
the example. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you and I are sitting in a room together. We've just walked into a room, and that in this room there are an infinite number of tumbling dominoes, and each domino that collapses also collapses a subsequent member, causing each subsequent domino to hit the floor. And then this is going on forever. Each domino takes a second to fall. Well, if this is the case, if the string of dominoes is infinitely long, We're going to be standing here for a long time waiting for all of this to collapse if each one takes 1 second. And now imagine that we just happen to notice that you're standing in this room and there's a little domino that's perched near your foot that's at the end of this row of infinites, and it's got the date of your birth written on it. And you bend down and you look at this, wow, it's got my birthday. This is my birthday domino. And we take interest in this and we begin to ask the question, well, how many dominoes, how long will we be standing here until your birthday arrives? And the answer to the question is that we would be waiting forever, because if each domino takes a second to collapse and there are infinite number of them, there are an infinite number of dominoes, and therefore your birthday never arrives. And this is kind of going back to the point I mentioned earlier. A
Well,
universe that's
mhm.
not triggered itself triggers nothing.
Well, that
And
assumes that time is linear and it goes in a progression of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which isn't really the primary theory on time right now. For example, B theory of time is a possibility where all points of time exist and there are an infinite amount of past time events. And there's no contradiction to that because all the dominoes are just fallen over, which just appears to be the case that they're not. There could be like a quantum state.
hold on, did you just say that the B theory of time holds that there are an infinite number of past events?
There can be, yes. There's no contradiction with that in theory.
I'm not aware of that at all.
There's no contradiction with that in theory. It doesn't preclude that. It says there's a beginning to our universe. It does not say there's a beginning to absolutely everything. It's not a part of the theory. So there's no contradiction with saying there are past and
Oh,
infinite
oh,
amounts.
I see, I see. Yeah, but well, there we just simply coming upon. How you doing, honey? It's my wife just walking in the door here. There we're dependent again on being able to demonstrate precisely the point which I identified in my example. And again, that's just the reason why I've just struggled to believe atheism.
Well, I don't see the contradiction in your example. Like, for example, there could be an infinitely past many events, and we just happen to be apparent in one of them. For example, all the dominoes could already be knocked over. There's no there's no reason that that couldn't be the case. Or there could be like a quantum
Sure.
point.
We walk in the room and there are an infinite number of dominoes that are already lying on the floor, and there's nothing logically incoherent about that.
Right? They're just all knocked over.
But how does that refute the notion that if each one took a second, then they wouldn't ever all fall over because you'd be waiting forever for that to happen? That would
Right? They
occur.
wouldn't. They just all already be fallen over.
Think about it this way: you're in line at Starbucks and you're sitting there ordering your drink, and then you happen to notice that I'm in the car at the window getting my container of coffee. You're ordering yours, and I'm getting mine, and you're wondering to yourself, how long will it take before I get to that window? Well, if there's an infinite number of cars between you and me, then you never arrive at the window. It's these kinds of arguments that for me have I've just never been able to disamuse myself of the idea that there has to be a beginning, an inaugural first mover, if you will, something that tipped everything else. Seems to be that has to exist, and so that's one of the things that I find to be persuasive. It's certainly many have argued that this is partial to the very argument for the existence of God. I think that's true too.
Well, there's two things I'd like to pick up on there. One is that I can pick a number at random, like negative 32. There are infinitely many numbers before negative 32. So there could be some kind of mechanism in reality that can pick a certain instance to start time. And then with those dominoes, there's going to be a finite amount of time if everyone goes one a second. There's going to be a finite amount from that point to the 100th domino, which is where I get my cup of coffee. So it could be the case that essentially at the Big Bang, there was a reality picked that starting point in the time period. And so from the point of the Big Bang to where we are now has been a finite number of dominoes, even if there are a past amount before that and a future amount after that. Does that make sense? Where you could just pick an arbitrary starting point and there's going to be infinitely many before and infinitely many after?
That gets back to the very example I described in my mind. Here, you're still waiting for eternity to actually get to the window to get your container of coffee, in which case you never taste it.
What do you mean? So the first domino is the Big Bang, and all of the events in our universe is a finite number of time after the Big Bang. Every domino happened every second. So everything that's happened to this point, we have no problem getting there. There's just the universe arbitrarily selected a time period like negative 32, started the Big Bang, and everything after that happened in a second increments, and we got to where we are getting the cup of coffee. So I don't see any contradiction there. If there's something in reality that can arbitrarily pick a number, pick a starting point out of the infinite array of past events, and just say we're going to start at negative 32, then there's no contradiction with saying I got my cup of coffee. because we, after starting at negative 32, there was a finite number until I got to my cup of coffee, even if there were an infinite number before that.
That would be, I think, to misunderstand my example. If there are an infinite number of events or an infinite number of cars between yours and mine, then you can't ever get to the window. That just simply shows that uh, that it's impossible to get there. Now choose any one of the cars. There's still an infinite number of cars ahead of him to get to the window.
Well, no, 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 there's a finite number. So there's only an infinite if you're looking at the
Infinity
entire
is an
set.
infinite number.
That's only if you're looking at the entire set. If you divide it into a single point, there's going to be a finite number in between any 2 points of that infinite set. Unless you're actually trying to make it bigger between those 2 points, which is not the case.
Well, I think this gets at the very heart of what I pointed out a moment ago. Infinity minus three is infinity.
Well, no, again, in set theory we can do math, so
Added
that's not
or
a
subtracted.
in set theory we can do the math there. So the math there supports my position. If you just take 2 points in between infinity, like 47 and 32, I mean, there's infinite numbers before 47 or after 47 and before 32, but there's a finite number between 47 and
Sure
32.
there is. Sure there is. Yeah, I grant that.
And so I'm saying there's a finite number
I don't
between.
understand how a past infinite sequence of temporal events can lead us to this moment. I just
Well, again, so you can just, if there is some mechanism in reality that can pick a number, just any finite starting point, 32, then we can get the entire universe and all of the events after that. So there'd have to be
but that would
some.
only be because the universe has been shown to be finite.
No,
There must be
this.
some delay in the signal here. Something is not quite working as I'm trying to
Well, I'm not sure you're understanding me.
cover the timing out.
I'm not sure you're understanding my point here. So we're going to grant there is a past eternal universe. Everything is eternal. And we're going to say there is this second thing independent of the past eternal universe, and it can pick the slides. There's infinite many. It's going to pick a slide independent of the past eternal universe. And it's going to say we're going to start the apparent time frame here. There's still an infinite past where a bunch of other stuff happened, but it's going to pick a starting point, and then the dominoes are going to start to fall there.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I follow exactly what it is that you're saying.
So I can pick a number like 37, and there are infinitely many.
Someone picks someone picks one domino out of an infinite collection of dominoes and selects every domino after that. But the point is whether or not time can consume an infinite number of events, not whether time, some person, say you or I, could walk up to the set of collapsing dominoes and say, I'm going to pick this one, and then I'm going to pick your birthday domino, and we're going to make this possible. Certainly that's possible, but that's not the question. The question is whether or not time can consume an infinite number of events. And that's precisely the thing that, again, I've just never heard an argument that has been persuasive to me in this regard.
Right.
So,
So your objection is how can time have an infinite number of events? Because if there was, we would never be able to get to the present moment. My objection is that if time has an infinite number of events, the way we can get to the present moment is someone can pick the present moment and start the dominoes there.
oh, sure, but that is precisely to prove the argument of what I've discussed. You're talking, but the sound is muted out.
Uh,
Um,
Me?
I didn't hear anything you just said. I'm sorry.
I said that time can be
Yeah.
infinite and someone can pick a particular point in time and start it there.
Oh, yes. That just goes to show that you cannot time cannot traverse an infinite number of events. I was speaking once with a college student in a coffee shop about this very point. I said you can't have an infinite number of past events. He said yes, you can. You can just start from here and go infinitely. But I said that's the point. Where there's a distinction within mathematics between a line that starts from one point and goes in one direction and a line that goes infinitely in two directions.
Um,
The one is an actual infinite, the other is a potential infinite. And what we're saying is that there cannot be an actual infinity of events which have preceded this one.
I still don't think you're following me. So I'm saying there is an actual infinite, both past and future. We have positive numbers and negative numbers that go infinitely in every direction, and we can just pick one. 42, negative 42, 37, 87, negative 3.1425. There can be an infinite number in the past and the future, and we can still pick a starting point at any point and then start it there. So there can still be infinitely many before, like a movie. We can think of a movie that has an
Mhm.
infinitely many past scenes. We can just pick scene 37 and start the movie there, and it can still have an infinitely many past scenes.
I don't see how that's possible. We're talking about whether time can consume an infinite number of events, not whether we can arbitrarily pick one and start there and go into the future.
Well, that's
Oh,
the.
you're talking not coming through. I'm
Uh,
sorry.
I don't think I'm.
This is what you.
So 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 if there can be, we can, like a movie, we have infinitely many scenes, both in the past and the future. We can pick a scene, any scene we want, and start the scene there. If nature has some kind of a mechanism that can do that, then time can consume an infinitely many past things because it has this incremental process where it can start at any given point and then go to a finite amount to get to be getting the cup of coffee.
Yeah, I just don't see how what you described is. Are you still talking again?
No,
The screen is shows you talking, but there's no sound.
it's just a
I'm
delay. You
sorry, I
can
might
just
have been.
ignore it. You can just ignore it.
Oh, okay. Very good. Yeah. All right. I'll sort of give the answer here. I think that when one picks one point and says, I'm going to go infinitely in this direction, that is different from saying that prior to this point, there are an infinite number of past events which time has traversed. There are an infinite number of physical states which have preceded the current physical state. And that I see as demonstrably impossible to demonstrate. I don't have any problem with saying we can pick one point, call it today, this calendar day, the 27th of July, and move infinitely into the future. That to me is just simply unproblematic.
Right. So do you
What
see
becomes troubling is doing what I suggested initially.
Right. So, but do you see a contradiction with the idea that there is a movie with infinitely many scenes and we just picked a scene and started from the middle? Like there could be past infinitely
Well,
many
the
scenes.
first thing you ask the question whether or not this holds any kind of. I mean, can there be a movie with infinitely numerous scenes? I don't know that there can be.
Let's just assume that for a second and say I just picked one in the middle and there are infinitely many before
Mhm.
this. There's no real contradiction there, right? There's not a logical contradiction with that option.
No, but there's a logical contradiction with the notion that we can have an infinite number that descends.
Only if you
Right?
assume it's
An infinite
descending.
quantity cannot be downwardly adjusted, right?
Right, again, but
So I,
that's only predicated on the assumption that you are counting one at a time. If you're not counting one at a time, there's no contradiction.
but if you're not counting one at a time, then I mean, how is that time? It's not a sequence of events. Without a temporal sequence of events, time breaks down.
Right, so there could be a different property of nature in addition to time that can count incrementally instead of doing it one at a time, which you can get and it can just start at a random number.
Right, but this cannot be reduced to a temporal sequence of actual events.
I'm not sure I follow. Like it would be a separate time, separate kind of time. So we have the original kind of linear time that goes back infinitely in the future, infinitely in the past, and we have a second kind of time that just skips and it picks incrementally where to start.
Are you referring to a theory of time that exists, or I mean, are you talking? What are you talking about? I mean, there's the causal theory of time. That's one model. There are other theories of time that are out there. You've named another one of them, the B theory of time. What exactly are you talking about? Is there a model that we might interact with?
No, this is just mine. This is completely mine, completely original.
Oh, okay. So it's original to you. Yeah, I'm unfamiliar with this idea. I mean, perhaps it's something that I'll give some thought to, but I, it initially doesn't strike me as arresting, at least not on a philosophical level.
Well, the goal is just to see here is a natural way that we can solve the problem of having a past infinite get to the present moment. If there is
Mm-hmm.
So we can have a past infinite, and then we can have a way to increment it in a counting system of a second kind of time, which can jump those increments and get us to the present moment. If so, we can't get.
Sounds like time travel.
Yes, exactly. It would be like time travel, where
I,
there's.
I guess it's so fanciful that I've just I've never considered it, and it strikes me as you know maybe that was the reason that I asked you whether or not the model was something that had been demonstrated within scholarly circles because it's unfamiliar to me, and so because it's unfamiliar, I suspected it might be original. I've never considered it before. I've never tried to argue against it. Perhaps I'll give some thought to it.
Okay, thanks. That would be great. So, what you said you wanted to go into some other reasons that you talk about that you believe.
Sure, sure. Well, I'm just a big fan of old arguments. Old arguments are things that have been tested, have been vetted by human beings who have thought about these problems for a long, long time. And so, when it comes to refuting what's typically referred to as methodological skepticism, I really am a fan of Sextus Empiricus's argument that the what's now known as the Munchausen trilemma.
Agrippa's trilemma,
Essentially,
right?
Agrippa's trilemma is one of the references. Yeah, and so the three classical ways to demonstrate that something is probative is to either argue on the basis of infinitism, coherentism, or foundationalism. And so, for me, a lot of the arguments of skepticism seem to rely upon infinitism, which, in my mind, renders all things uh, non non provable. This is an argument which inherently cannot be probative. So,
So,
for if we see a contingent proposition, call it A, we prove A by B, we prove B by C, and then we do this onwards to Z. But once we reach Z, we're faced with a sort of impasse. What do we do with this? How do we show that Z is probative and therefore the whole set is to be trusted, the propositions? Well, infinitism argues that we hold that Z is true on the basis of A prime and A prime by B prime and thus unto infinity. In other words, we're essentially saying that A, the original contingent proposition, is eternally contingent. It cannot be shown to be probative. And so essentially, infinitism would lead us to believe that nothing is ultimately provable, which strikes me on rational grounds as false. There are certain things that are provable, and I think we've made mention of a few of them in this discussion. So that leads us to the second argument, the second leg of the trilemma. Well, can we just simply argue that Z is veridical on the basis of Y? In other words, do we simply just go backwards? And that seems to be no different than saying that Z is true because A is the proof, which is to argue circularly. And so, what those who try to essentially manufacture arguments from coherentism do is they just take the proof warrant and pass it like a basketball to various members in the previous set. That seems to me to demonstrate little. And one ultimately might say that it just simply collapses to a form of foundationalism. That is, you're just simply saying that these have to be foundationally true. Well, why? Do you think that's truth conducive? And once we do that, we've started the infinite regress of questions again, in which case nothing's ultimately probative. So then we say, well, how do we show them that Z is veridical? And so the foundationalist says, well, Z is true because Z is the proof. Well, some people would say that proves nothing. But it does if the thing in question is an axiom. If it's not a presupposition, but it's an axiom, something that is self-evidentially true, like A plus B is equal to B plus A, then we just simply say, well, that there's no good rational reason to doubt that that's the case. And since there isn't, then we just simply say, well, then that's a starting point on which to base our argument. And so I for one, am convinced that foundationalism, according to the variety that I described, the axiomatic argument for God's existence, a metaphysically necessary being. If he exists in any possible world, and he exists in all possible worlds, this is a possible world, therefore he exists in this world, therefore God exists. That strikes me as very sound reason. So that has been something that I've entertained that as a very good foundation for logic and for math and for a good many other things that I hold as true.
all right, so you brought up three arguments there. I want to start with Agrippa's trilemma. I can just grant what you said on Agrippa's trilemma and say that naturalistic pantheism is equally as foundationally true as just an axiomatic thing, and it is equally the grounds of everything. It is the starting point. It is the outside of space-time, how you would
But there
describe
are
God to
no
be.
universes that are necessarily existent.
Sure, there are. I can just say, yep, there's an eternally necessary existing universe. It's just a
And
property.
how do you show that? I mean, are there things happening in this universe? Do things cause other things to happen in this universe? If they do, it would seem once again that we're right back to the arguments which I described previously.
Well, I just ask, I would ask you the same question about God, and whatever answer you use for God, I'm essentially going to reflect it back to pantheism and say what's true about pantheism.
Okay, so do you have any examples or?
Sure. So I would say that naturalistic pantheism is the foundational truth that grounds everything, and it's just a necessary part of reality. And then you would say something like, what? Well, how would you respond to that? You'd say that.
Well, I would say that I'm not aware of any reality model that can construe an infinite regress of events. It seems that any possible world necessarily has a beginning. This would be true even for the skeptics' most stifling challenge to date, which would be the old brain in the vat argument or Descartes' evil genius argument. There must have been some sort of inaugural set of affairs which sets the matrix world into motion. A brain cannot be invented if its person were never born.
All right,
And
and
if its person
how
were
does
born,
God
that means
solve
the
that
person
problem?
is a grandfather and a
How
pardon?
does a God solve that problem?
Well, it seems that there are two ways. Peter David Klein from Rutgers University argued that even if we cannot show that a given doubt is necessarily false, we can still neutralize that doubt. And I would say that that is what we have done in this case. We've just simply shown that some sort of a first mover sets the matrix world into motion. And so, therefore, whether the matrix world is this world doesn't matter because God would still be Lord of the Matrix, as it were. And so I see that as a very, persuasive resolution to the problem. Skepticism becomes refuted not because we show that the matrix world does not exist, but because we show that or rather, we say that God's existence has not been refuted by the matrix world
I'm specifically
because,
asking about the cosmological argument here. So God exists non-past
okay,
eternally, and He created the universe, correct?
God exists non-past eternally.
That He
What
exists
do you mean?
outside of space and time. Is that how you would phrase it?
Yep.
Okay, I can say there is a part of nature that exists outside of space and time and started our universe.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I would just simply say that uh, how did it start?
Quantum
If something
fluctuations.
exists, does this world have some sort of a conscious existence that brings it into being?
No, it has no consciousness. That's the one thing that differentiates it from
Well,
theism. It's not conscious.
problem because if if no consciousness chose to start it at some point, so that there would be some sort of a finite series of events that follows, then we begin to say, well, then why isn't that universe itself past eternal at that point? If it has a beginning, then it has some sort of a beginner.
Well, so there's a couple assumptions there.
That seems
One,
to show that.
oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I'd
Okay,
finished. I'm sorry.
okay. So
The video must be. Sorry.
okay, so uh, two assumptions there. One is that consciousness is the only thing that can exist outside of space and time and cause things, which I would just say that's an assumption. There could be lots of things outside of space time that can cause things. Second is that there's no evidence that consciousness can cause things outside of space time or
What
can
would be
exist
an
that.
example? Can you describe an example of something outside of time and space beside a disembodied mind that has the ability to cause things? I'm not aware of any.
Amplitude and Emergent Space Times by Sean Carroll.
Did you say Sean Carroll again?
Amplitude, the theory by Nima Arkani Hamad, is something that exists outside of space-time and can cause things. Or Sean Carroll's emergent space-time would be another alternative. Those actually have a basis in
Mhm.
physics other than the consciousness one, which doesn't. So I think those are actually more supported. And I think there's absolutely
Mhm.
nothing that supports the idea that consciousness can exist outside of space and time.
I Well, here's the thing: is that I've never heard of anything. I mean, perhaps you can explain to me further what you're talking about, and then I can interact uh, with what you're describing.
Well, I'm not an expert on quantum mechanics, so I'm a little hazy on it. But the idea is that there is this thing which Nima Arkani calls the amplituhedron. It's kind of like a particle, and it exists outside of space and time, and it causes space and time to emerge from the interactions of this particle. You'll have to. I can just refer you to his paper on it, which is a very well referenced and very popular paper in physics. It's just titled "The Amplituhedron," and you'd have to
Mhm.
research it more because it's way beyond my level of profession. But it does. He explicitly states it is outside of space and space and time are emergent properties from this thing.
Yeah, this is where I basically say that unless something like that can be demonstrated in some sort of objective sense, again, here Peter David Klein distinguishes philosophically between objective doubts and or psychological doubts, doubts that we just conceive of psychologically. We say there exists some, call it the greatest possible pizza or something like that. Um, but the thing itself cannot have any objective basis in reality, and so therefore it's not persuasive as a defeater for theism.
I see it differently. I
Because
see
it's been shown to be objectively sound on the basis of the axiomatic argument.
right. So I see it the other way. I see that this has a basis in physics, and physics is empirically demonstrable. So it's a combination of empirically demonstrable principles, particles, and laws, even if the
Again,
combination.
Carroll's model has been unpersuasive to the broader community of astrophysicists. There's not a lot of support behind it. The most widely assented to model of cosmology that I'm aware of would be the standard Big Bang model.
Uh,
So the idea that our space-time, I mean, Ellis says, there are infinities of universe that exist, whatever that means. He quips, and he says none of these can be proven to be true, even in principle. They must just simply be conjectured upon as being sound. And Sean Carroll himself has argued for pitching things like falsifiability in the enterprise of science, which would, of course, lead to the destruction of the discipline, at least as
right. I'm
far
not.
as
I'm not
I'm
talking
concerned.
about cosmology here. I'm talking about quantum mechanics. So this is a quantum mechanics interpretation. It has nothing to do with cosmology or the Big Bang. It's independent of that. So the emergent space-time isn't.
If you're saying that it has some sort of place in cosmogony, then it is a cosmological.
No, again, this is quantum mechanics. How we relate quantum mechanics to general relativity is unknown. It's one of the biggest problems in physics. So
Yeah,
there isn't a bridge
that's
there. This is purely
a
quantum mechanics.
psychological one. It's not an objective one. It's a psychological one. I mean,
What's this?
there are a number of things we don't know, and again, since as as far as I am aware, the Borguth-Vilenkin theorem holds irrespective of any quantum description of gravity prior to the Planck era. So.
Right. I think I have a quote from Vilenkin where he just explicitly says if we discover quantum gravity, then his theory just doesn't apply, may not apply at all. So that isn't actually true. I'm fairly like 99.999% confident here. No, if we discover quantum gravity, it could completely invalidate everything he's done there because it's a completely new thing of physics. And I have quotes supporting that.
Sure. Then send that my way, and I can correspond with you via email.
Absolutely. I will definitely do that. Make a note of that right
Sure.
here. All right.
Okay.
So,
Thanks.
but going back to my point was that so we have things in physics that can exist independent of space-time, and from my perspective, because they're grounded in physics, they have a much stronger, or it's much more reasonable to believe that they're true than just philosophical arguments. So I think that these things are far more reasonable to believe can exist. What?
Have we seen these things? That is, have we sort of empirically observed them? You're telling me
No.
that they actually exist on the basis of what?
So everything in physics is a combination of principles, particles, and laws in physics. They're not allowed to just make stuff up. It's all different combinations of equations that have been demonstrated, even if the combination itself hasn't been demonstrated.
Yeah, this kind of goes back to the old idea that our models are as real as tables and chairs. I think that falls short of a discovery.
Oh, I
Our
totally agree.
mathematics
I totally agree.
real.
I'm not going that far with this argument. I'm just saying that from my perspective, if you're using a combination of principles, particles, and laws in physics, that to me is a much stronger argument or reasonable to believe than just philosophical arguments. So I think it's much more reasonable to believe that these
Why?
are
How is
true.
that different?
I think the philosophical
How,
arguments are just unsupported. You can just make stuff up whenever willy nilly and just kind of insert it wherever you want.
that's precisely the way that this argument sounds. It doesn't sound like it's supported by actual astrophysics. That
Again,
is things that we can observe, that we can catalog, that we can describe, that other people can see. That it sounds precisely like that to me.
it's again so this is quantum mechanics, so it's not cosmology. Those are separate fields. We can't bridge those yet. So I'm not talking about cosmology. I'm talking about just quantum mechanics. And the reason is because it's only made of combinations of things that have been demonstrated. Even if that combination hasn't been demonstrated, all of the pieces of it have been. Whereas in philosophy, that is not the case.
Well, to me, you know, again, what is the basis for our mathematical models? I think that math to me is something that is universally true. You plus me equals two, whether we're standing in heaven, on earth, or in hell. There just simply is no way to refute that. And unless something comes along that appears to me to be irrefutable, it seems that I'm fully justified in my theism. I'm rationally justified in it.
I'm not following how that connects to this specific argument. So my argument is again that the physics is more reasonable because it's all based on combinations of things that have been verified. The philosophy is less reasonable because it's not based on things that have been verified or combinations of things that have been verified.
Well, this kind of gets at sort of the, you can look at the arguments of Bose von Frausen and even Hawking himself, who held that the universe is actually fundamentally unobservable. That essentially, you know, look for example to energy are just simply theoretical and mathematical abstractions, which we cannot get a hold of or rationally justified in believing it because it points to something that's real. And so I'm inclined to say that that's the case, but I'm not familiar again with what you're describing. And so I'm some sort of a metaphysically necessary particle or something that's outside of space and time and that creates space time. Something like this has never been commended by the entire scientific community, as far as I'm aware.
Well, I agree. So again,
And
it's
that may change tomorrow. I would I would have to deal with it at that point on a different level. Something like that could be shown to be true tomorrow, and I'd have to wrestle with it. And I readily admit that I would have to take a lot of these concepts to the iron of reason and essentially hammer out what I think to be the counterclaims to these sorts of notions. I would have to do that.
right. So I think the consensus in physics is that we essentially can't say what's outside of space and time. So consciousness is out, and this hypothetical particle is out because we don't have any basis in physics to conclude anything about necessary things. It's not a principal particle law or a combination of any that we can get from physics. So it's not something we can say from physics at all. It's just outside of the grounds of physics entirely. But if you want to make an extrapolation to this necessary thing that created everything, I can just do the same thing and just replace the supernatural consciousness with a natural particle. And physicists could do this, it's just not physics, so they don't.
Yeah, again, that gets back to what I pointed out earlier. It seems to me that the argument breaks down because, in order for something that is not conscious to give rise to a finite effect, what is it that does this? An unembodied mind is a very good candidate for what produces a finite effect that is a sequence of events that have a definite starting point. If the cause is sufficient to produce the effect, and there's no consciousness to stop the cause from producing the effect, then we've got to begin to say, well, then why hasn't the effect, meaning the universe, existed forever? But then that gets back to that runs aground in the very same set of problems that I identified earlier. We can't have a physical state of affairs that endures for an infinite number of temporal seconds. It just simply breaks down. And there I feel fairly certain that my argument stands squarely in the broader swath of thinkers on this view. So
Well, I definitely disagree there because most philosophers are atheists and most physicists are atheists. So they definitely just pretty much, if we're talking about the
I'm not,
vast swath.
I'm not saying that they're theists. I'm saying the point of there having to necessarily be some sort of first cause that gets the rest of the causes going. Every finite cause necessarily has
Oh,
to
right,
have some
right.
sort of a parent. Therefore, some eternal parentless cause has to exist that starts everything, or else you cannot have the ability for us to have arrived at, as I've mentioned, the current calendar date.
Oh, I agree with you completely on that. I just think there's no need for a God, and I think consciousness, there's no basis to conclude consciousness could do that in any sense. Consciousness seems to be completely contingent on material things as far as we can tell. There's no evidence of unembodied minds as far as I can tell. And the best candidate we have for something that can exist
No, there's
outside of space and time is those physics models that we have. And everything else is essentially just assertion.
Yeah, here Christianity has some very very powerful things to say to a person. I think if somebody says that there's no such thing as sort of an immaterial mind, I would say, well, look no further than yourself.
I think that
You
everything.
you are not just simply chemicals fizzing. Surely there has to be something. You have a body, but you are a soul. You are there's something about you that cannot be reduced to simply a physicalist account of your personal makeup.
Well, I definitely
So
agree that with our
TJump Tom Jump has to have there's something precious about Tom Jump. You are a much more valuable than the somehow $11 and some odd cents that your collective carbon elements are worth. I think that there has to be, and that becomes the basis for our justice system. That becomes the basis for saying that it's wrong for so and so to kill so and so for no reason. These we only break these laws to the detriment of ourselves and society. And so, I just
So,
I
so,
think I think you have a mind. You have a mind that is not just simply your body. There's something separate.
so I agree that with our current understanding of naturalism, we can't explain consciousness, but I believe that consciousness could be explained by unknown natural processes. Like, even if we grant that consciousness is separate from all known natural forces, we don't need to make a jump to some kind of supernatural kind of a thing. We can just say it's an unknown natural thing. So I don't see why you're making this jump to this, like it's a completely separate non-natural thing. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. It seems to be much more plausible to conclude it's just an unknown natural thing.
An unknown. So in other words, it's part and partial to this universe.
Yes.
Okay, well then, how does the universe create itself?
Well, I'm just going on the mind here. Just on the mind. The mind could be a product of the universe.
Yeah, I think that with our willingness to agree with that goes the intrinsic basis for holding that certain actions are wrong or others are morally praiseworthy. Um, all of that is just simply the socio cultural developments of a group of highly developed primates on a relatively um, pedestrian, part of the Milky Way that produced the Earth by pure chance. I just think that if that is the case, then moral things, moral rightness, moral wrongness is lost in the process. And so that's why I, as a Christian, am convinced that we need to keep there being some sort of a basis for upholding, um, rightness and wrongness that is directly connected to this thing I've described as the soul. By the way, is your last name Jump?
Yes.
I said Jump is okay. All right, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't. Perhaps it was
Pseudonym?
a pseudonym. Yeah.
Right. So I'm a moral realist. I believe in objective morality. Most philosophers are moral realists, and most philosophers are naturalists. So I don't. There's no real contradiction to having objective morality independent of a supernatural something.
Um, yeah, I would. If there is no part as necessarily a supernatural you, let's call it, then I just don't see a basis for our, the basic moral principles that undergird our society.
Well, there's hundreds and hundreds of candidates that are proposed by philosophers all the time. So I don't really see uh,
Mhm.
what.
Oh, I just said,
Oh yeah.
what are those? Yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
consequentialism, utilitarianism, Peter Singer's morality. There's all kinds of moral systems. You can just Google models of morality into Wikipedia, and they'll give you a list of like 300 of them. And I have my own version,
Hmm.
true too. So I mean, there's lots and lots of different alternatives for an objective morality, and they seem to function significantly more effectively than the theist model of
Yeah, but
morality.
here they're not reducible to an axiom like God. For example, if we just simply say, well, what is the basis for those moral systems? If the person says this is the basis and this is the final thing that shows that my moral system is right, then I'm immediately going to ask, and of course, the question that I'm going to ask. It immediately becomes, do you think that that thing that you described, do you think that that stands as a proof as truth conducive? As soon as you answer the question, we've just continued the infinite regress. And so at that point, I just simply point out, well, then there's got to be some other basis for it. What is it? Well, then you just simply toss it like a basketball back to some sort of previous member of the set. And there I simply say, well, then that just collapses to foundationalism. Are you a foundationalist? No, I'm not a foundationalist. I'm something else because I don't believe that we can just say that Z is true because Z is the proof.
Oh, but wait, wait,
And
wait,
then
wait, wait.
I say, well, then
So my response to that is yes.
Hmm?
I'm going to adopt the foundationalist viewpoint and say yes. We can say naturalistic pantheism is the foundationalist viewpoint in the grounds of objective morality and truth and rationality and morality and purpose and all those kinds of things. It's just undiscovered laws of nature. So I'll just adopt the same
Sure.
foundationalist viewpoint.
That seems, that seems to rest on the idea that a universe can exist eternally. That is, with some sort of an infinite regress of events. And to me, I personally speaking, I've never been able in all my studies to wrap my mind around the notion that there is some sort of a reality model which can be constructed, which has an infinite regress of events that lacks some kind of a causal parent, as I've described it.
Right,
I
right. But
just,
I'm agreeing with that. I'm saying yes, there is something that exists outside of space and time. It's just a natural something that doesn't have a mind.
it is natural something that doesn't have a mind. And but again, that gets back to the very thing that I pointed out a moment ago. If the cause is sufficient to generate the effect, and the cause is eternal, then why isn't the effect eternal? But the effect itself, a physical universe, cannot be eternal in the past. It had to come in existence at some sort of a finite time ago, and it seems that nothing else but a mind could create an effect that is finite and limited duration. For example, a man, as William Lane Craig is described, and actually I think this was Kant, a man sitting in a chair from eternity could choose to stand up, right? And then he could stand up, and he's exercising this by his own free will and creating a new thing that from that point on, there's a finite series of events that are taking place, but from eternity he's been sitting. But the reason why he can do this is because he has a mind. He has a will, and he's bringing something about that is limited in duration.
Right. So I don't think there is anything. I don't think free will is possible. So I think all will-based decisions are either determined or random, just like all matter-based actions are either determined or random. So anything a mind can do, natural processes can do.
But do you not believe in the idea of compatibilism? You don't believe that free will is possible?
Compatibilism is just a kind of determinism. It's just free will is just it's just
Like for example, let's just say that you're standing in a booth and you've got a choice to make. You've got to vote either for Donald Trump on the one hand, or else Hillary Clinton, and you're standing in the voting booth. And let's just say that there's a mechanism in your brain that says you're going to vote for Hillary Clinton. And then out of your own free will, you decide to vote for Hillary Clinton. You had no choice but to vote for Hillary Clinton because of this mechanism that was wired to your brain. But does that negate the fact that you didn't choose to do it? So it just seems to me that the idea that what I decide to do is predetermined negates the idea that I have free will. That doesn't
right.
seem to
I
follow.
agree. So compatibilism, as Dan Dennett presents it, is just a kind of determinism. So I am a determinist. I think that all actions are either determined or random, and there is no free will. I don't think free will is even logically possible.
I don't think that necessarily takes away the possibility of libertarian freedom. And there are many proponents of compatibilism who will argue that this does preserve libertarian human freedom.
I think it preserves it from a legal standpoint, but not from a metaphysical standpoint. But just go back to my main argument. So I think free will is logically impossible because everything is either determined or random. Any decision you make, you're either going to do it for reasons, in which case it's determined by those reasons, or you're going to do it by no reason, which makes it by definition random. And I don't think there's any way to escape that dichotomy.
Mm. Yeah, I think that this notion that because I'm predetermined to do something, that necessarily means that I don't have a free will. I don't know if you're familiar at all with the arguments of Molinism here, the scholarship of several noted theists. We have them to credit for essentially bringing out into the public, to the English speaking world, the writings of Luis de Molina, who has argued that God chooses a world to create in which certain free creatures freely choose to do the very things that he wants to bring about as outcomes, the outcomes that he desires. So he takes an utterly unlimited survey of all the possible worlds that he could create, but decides to create this one. In other words, he decided to create the world where Ben Fischer chose to accept an invitation from TJump to be a part of this wonderful discussion to talk about the possibility of God. There's a possible world that exists in which I turned down the invitation. But God didn't choose to create that world. He chose to create this one. And yet I'm still making these free decisions because his choice was, in a sense, decided in view of them. That's at least one model. Now, that description of compatibilism is not one that I necessarily hold to, but it seems that it's possible. It
Right.
seems that it does preserve my freedom at the same time as admitting that things have been predetermined that way.
Sure, sure, I can grant that,
So,
but that would support my point that anything that a will can do is either determined or random, but anything a particle can do is also determined or random. So anything a will can do, a particle can also do. So you wouldn't need a mind to start the universe at that point, because particles can do that determined or random things also.
mm, yeah, and then that kind of gets back to the arguments that I mentioned a moment ago. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the question: is that how can there be this separate kind of free will thing that can start the universe that isn't determined or random? It seems like it's going to have to necessarily be determined or random, just like particles are determined or random.
Mm. So you're saying that the existence of stochastic processes like what you described, these show what? I'm not sure that I'm following.
So anything that a mind can do, natural processes can do
Mm-hmm.
without a mind. So if a mind is either determined or random to do whatever it does, like start the universe at some given point, then
Mm-hmm.
there could be some natural property which is determined or random to start the universe at some given point. You don't need the mind to do it.
Well, certainly we could say that, for example, if the Big Bang singularity gives rise to a cosmic creation event, as described by the arguments of cosmology, then that would be a description of a naturalistic universe that arises from nothing. But there, I think here's my basic problem with for example that model is that a space-time universe could not arise from a state of infinite density. Can something which is infinitely hot become less hot? That seems to me to be impossible. Infinite heat cannot reduce. Infinite density cannot be downwardly adjusted. So it just seems it's stuck at that point. Um, so there had to be some sort of physical state of affairs that pre-existed the Big Bang, but eventually, again, on the basis of the Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, that goes back to a singularity itself. And this is said to be true irrespective of the arguments of, for example, a quantum theory of gravity.
So,
And
so
again, you promised to send me an email,
right,
so do
I've
send
got
me
the
the
quote.
email that you're talking about.
But again, my point was just saying, if you wanted to create the universe, you're saying that you need some kind of a consciousness to do the
Correct.
creating. And I'm saying anything a consciousness can do, unguided natural processes without consciousness can also do them. Because anything a consciousness can do can be uh, split into a dichotomy of either determined or random. They're going to be one of those two things. And anything that the unguided natural processes are going to do is going to be either determined or random. So I don't see
Determined by
anything. It's like anything.
some pre-existing law. Is it some pre-existing law? I mean, what are you saying? In which case, you're just saying that this physical state of affairs can be stretched back to some event prior, for example, to the Planck era, and then that goes back further, but that can't be extended infinitely backwards. If we could construe a reality model in which something like that could be possible, I might entertain more doubt
Well, I'm saying the same
about.
thing applies to consciousness. Either consciousness must either be determined in that same sense and go back to the infinite regress, or it has to be undetermined completely, which makes it by definition random.
Well, again, are you trying to say that this either or dichotomy that you initially described that I attempted to refute a moment ago, the Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump example I gave, that compatibilism is somehow to be debunked?
Well, no, because compatibilism is compatible with this theory that everything is either determined or random. So compatibilism doesn't refute that dichotomy. It's coherent with that dichotomy.
So in my mind, compatibilism, yes, it does affirm determinism, but it also affirms libertarian human freedom. And so therefore it is an in between position. It's both. It's both at the same time. It allows both to work together. So therefore, simply saying that compatibilism is a form of determinism, my question immediately becomes then how does compatibilism eradicate the possibility of libertarianism? It's a form of determinism. So what? There's still libertarian human freedom. That's the point. It's compatible.
From my understanding, the majority consensus on compatibilism is that it just is a kind of determinism. I'm familiar with Molinism, but I'm pretty sure he just conflates cause and reason, and he says there can be causes that aren't reasons, but cause and reason are synonyms. He's just saying there are reasons that aren't reasons.
I'm not aware of any argument that collapses compatibilism to determinism solely. I
Dan Dennett's version,
Dan Dennett's version of
compatibilism.
compatibilism. But perhaps I need to do some reading on that. I mean, yeah, sure, yeah,
Okay.
could be
Well,
possible.
all right, sure. Well, we've been going for a little over an hour. I have some questions for you if you
Yeah,
don't mind.
sure, sure. Go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
All right, let's scroll up. Where we got the questions? Ask Ben, if we have a soul, then why do people's personality change when they have some sort of brain damage? They become different people in some cases. If they had a soul, that shouldn't happen. From Dave Langer.
Mm. That's an excellent question. The way that Christianity can answer this is by assenting to a model of anthropology, biblical anthropology, called trichotomy, the trichotomic nature of man. That is that he is spirit, soul, and body. The soul is not the only immaterial part of a human being, but there's this other thing called the spirit, and that the soul can be affected by what goes on in the physical, in this case, but that the spirit, which is back there behind the soul, is different categorically from the soul. Now, those who hold to a trichotomic nature of man, there are arguments across the spectrum within evangelicalism. There are some that say that there are only a soul and a body, but I would be someone that would hold to this trichotomic nature of human beings. And so the notion that a person can be brain damaged, and yet that doesn't necessarily disprove that there's this immaterial self behind him that has some intrinsic worth. Um, I would hold to that model.
All right, the next question is why doesn't God do the obvious and just show every human that he exists instead of creating this biggest mystery possible? From Robot Wookie.
From Robot Wookie.
Yeah.
What a wow. Well, I think this is certainly an interesting question. Why does he just show himself? But here we might just simply point to the multiplicity of arguments. I certainly haven't mentioned them. I've only simply walked out two particular arguments. The first one being the axiomatic argument for the existence of God, and then I mentioned that I have some doubts that the arguments of skepticism are true on the basis of the Munchausen trilemma that I mentioned a moment ago, or several, or somewhere in this discussion. So those are the only two that I brought up. But there are a good number of other arguments. There are arguments for the resurrection, which I find to be highly, deeply persuasive. Um, when you just sit down and you walk out with a skeptic, you just sort of play a game of resurrection bingo. What are the possible causes for the evidence that we have? Does this explain it? It explains this piece and this piece and not this piece. And you just simply walk through the various evidences. The bodily resurrection of Jesus shines out as being, in my opinion, just a tremendous vindication and proof of theism, Christian theism. And then you just go right down the line. The moral argument, the cosmological argument that you've mentioned, the teleological argument, all of these cumulatively show a case which, in my mind, is just as persuasive as me seeing God. I mean, what if? If I saw God, I guess I suppose I could be hallucinating, right? So there would be reason to doubt that. But if you have evidence from a multiplicity of arguments, that creates a cumulative case, and I and others have found that quite convincing.
It'd be really interesting to talk to you about the historicity next time because I'm definitely interested in that topic.
Sure. Okay.
The next question
Yeah.
was: is there a fallacy of composition by conflating linear time as we perceive it and space-time to that of causal events outside of space-time? Not exactly sure what that means. From Edgar.
I'm confess I'm not either. If the questioner wants to issue that question again and just maybe kind of distill it, that I would try to answer that.
Uh, how do you define the term universe? From Banana Junior 11.
Oh, okay. Well, my definition of what the universe is that it is all of space and time with no space and time, uh, at least not accessible to us outside of it. Some have conjectured again to a multiverse, um, but that just seems to make our universe a member of a larger set of universes, physical universes that are out there. But this would just be simply an extension of the very same concept of multiverses. It's just a larger, ensemble of universes, but it's all still physical.
And he
So
said
the
this was
universe is just simply the everything that is physical and everything that exists within the constraints of space time.
he said this was for both of us. So my definition of the universe would be the observable universe. I would describe the larger system as the cosmos, as Carl Sagan put it. Would you
Mm-hmm.
would you ask
Yes, I
him?
would.
Oh, so the next question would be from Robot Wookie again. Would you ask him to defend an all-powerful being putting hundreds of billions of humans into an eternal microwave oven when that being never gave those humans absolute proof that he exists?
There I'd go again to what is absolute proof. If the question means some sort of physical, proof, again, empiricism it becomes subject to the very problems that infinitism, the argument of infinitisms. In which case, there's no real way to show that the universe exists. How do you get outside of the universe to prove the universe? And so, if something becomes pushed into an infinite regress, then it itself is impossible. The thing in question that sort of ultimately undergirds all reality must be foundationalist and axiomatic in nature, and that's why I hold that there is better proof from just something as simple as the axiomatic argument. But beyond that, one could experience God directly by just simply asking Him to reveal Himself to us. And I think that, again, for me personally, that's the way it happened. Some almost 20 years ago now, standing on a college campus, looking up into a night sky, and I just reclaimed the faith of my youth after a 5-year episode of complete apostasy. And I felt fairly strong in my faith from that time until this time. And I've had to come to admit that I think that these things are true. I believe them.
All right, so Brenda von Ashen asks, why don't you include God in the universe? Would a universe be
Well, I don't.
everything that exists? God, if the universe is everything that exists and God exists, then wouldn't God be a part of the universe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that God is God. The Christian argument here again, and this is the argument that I stand on because I'm defending Christian theism. The Christian view of God is that He transcends the universe. He's involved in it with us, but He transcends space and time, and as a transcendent causal agent, He brings space time into existence. And so we can hold to the idea of a universe while also holding to the notion of this transcendent reality that creates the universe, and that's what you see in Genesis chapter 1.
All right, Zakum asks, could you be wrong about the existence of God?
Could I be wrong about the existence of God? Well, here, I think that this makes the question subjective. And in my opinion, axioms are objectively true. So I think that any person could be wrong about anything, but if the thing that the person is saying is right is something which is objectively demonstrably true or axiomatic, then in my opinion, I just say that I can't find any reason to say that that axiom is somehow um, subject to doubt. You know, axioms are self-evident, irreducible primes. How can such a thing be shown to be false? And so, the question is directed at me, and I can certainly understand that. But it seems to me that it's inquiring about the existence of something that is objective in nature. And so, in that sense, the person who believes in God, it becomes impossible for them to be wrong
All right, thanks for
about.
answering the questions. I really appreciate it. I'm getting hungry, so I'm going to get some food. Thanks again for coming
Sure,
on.
sure.
Thanks again for coming on. I
Yeah,
really appreciate it.
yes, yes. Thank you for having me on the show, and it's been a wonderful conversation, Tom. Hope we can do it again.
Absolutely. Next time we talk about Jesus, and I'll send you that email.
Sure, sure. Yeah, send that along to me. I'd be happy to entertain any of that as we discuss, perhaps in the next conversation.
All right. See you later.
So.